The stories shared on It Takes Balls are unique to the individual sharing. Always speak with your trusted medical provider for treatment options specific to you. Welcome back to It Takes Balls. Today I'm joined by Mason Burchette. He's a director of marketing and development professionally, but what's important here is that he's a survivor of testicular cancer. Mason, thanks for being here.
Hey man, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be a part of this.
So I read your story that you submitted on the Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation website, and you had a bit of an interesting one. Let's start from the very beginning. I noticed that you said that you caught it on a self-exam. Were you practicing self-exams regularly, or was that something that you were taught before?
No, not at all. And it's actually interesting how this came about. So when I was 22, I had already had 2 kids, and so I decided to get a vasectomy because I was done and wanted to find something else to do.
Yeah.
So I had a vasectomy, which my urologist was not crazy about as a 22-year-old. But I did it, and anyone that's had one of those, it's not really as big a deal as everybody makes it out to be. But I did have some issues with my left side after it was over, and had some ongoing pain, and had to go back to the urologist and get it checked out. So really, I had some pain on my left side. And I just always chalked it up to, must have been a bad vasectomy. And I just ignored it. And it persisted for probably 2 years, I guess, almost 3. And I noticed pain on my right side. And I was like, okay, well, nothing, I didn't even have any trouble with the vasectomy on the right side, but I still ignored it for a little bit because I thought, whatever, vasectomy pain. And finally, I have to travel a lot for work, drive 5-6 hours at a time. And I noticed that I was getting a lot of pain when I was having to drive and just sit for a long period of time. And so I was like, forget it. I'm just going to go to the doctor because I haven't had a checkup in forever anyways. So I just go to a GP and have a checkup. And he's like, I'm going to refer you to a urologist. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, whatever. And he's like, yeah, so go see him. So I had to go out of town. And so I went out of town for 4 days, came back, went and had an ultrasound done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And had an ultrasound done, and it came back, and my doctor called me the same day, and he's like, hey, I got your ultrasound results, and I got you in with the urologist tomorrow morning. And I was like, oh, good. So something probably isn't good. So I went to the imaging place that did my ultrasound and got a copy of it, got a paper copy of it. I'm no doctor, but I wanted to see what it said. And it had measurements of everything, and such is enlarged and blah, blah, blah. And then it said malignancy by exclusion. And so naturally I was like, all right, time to WebMD this bad boy. So I spent the next several hours Googling it, and my GP literally texted me. He said, hey, don't Google any of this. Just wait to talk to your urologist. I was like, yeah, it's too late. It's too late. And so that's literally how I first decided to go to the doctor. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have ignored it as long if I had never had the vasectomy.
So when you were doing your WebMD that you weren't supposed to do, I mean, what were the things that you were seeing?
Yeah, I mean, the symptoms are pretty clear, right? My left nut my right nut was harder than my left one. It definitely felt unusual, which is why self-exams are so important. If you're familiar with the way that it usually feels, it's super obvious when something else is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And so just entering in the symptoms, it was like testicular cancer, you've got testicular cancer. And then searching the words malignancy by exclusion, I was like, yeah, I'm definitely just going to have cancer right now. And so I went to the urologist the next day, and I don't know if anybody just sits around and imagines what it's like to be diagnosed with cancer, but you always imagine, this real somber moment where the doctor's like, I'm so sorry, but this is, that's not the way it was at all. So he comes in, he goes, yeah, I usually don't like to read the ultrasound reports until I do an exam myself. And I was like, okay, sounds good. And so he did an exam, and he goes, yeah, that's definitely cancer. And I said, okay. He goes, we're going to need to get that out of there. And I didn't know enough about it. I'm like, the tumor, or
yeah.
It's like, no, we got to take the whole testicle out. And I was like, oh, okay. And so, I asked the questions about biopsy. Can we do biopsy? No, you can't go poking around on it or it'll spread and all that jazz. And I'm like, okay, so what kind of timeline are we looking at? This was on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And he goes, "What are you doing Friday?" And like this is just no big deal to this guy. And I was like, I guess I'm having an orchiectomy. So that's how that went down.
So, I mean, that happened pretty quick, and mine was similar. How did you, how was it when you were processing that information?
Man, it was mixed. So, because obviously cancer is such an ominous word. And I mean, he explained to me that if you're going to pick a cancer, if you find testicular cancer early, it's not a good one to have, but it's like one to pick if you're going to pick a cancer. And so that was somewhat reassuring. But he also explained, and I actually have two friends that had testicular cancer, and one of them caught it later and was very bad off. And so I had that image in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it spread, and he had a real tough time with it for years. And thankfully wound up beating it. But I didn't know, because you're in that moment of limbo where you don't know what stage it is, because they don't tell you any of that until after the orchiectomy,
Right.
and you go and get the scans and everything. And so I was in that period of limbo for like a week and a half where you don't know, like, is it in my lungs? Is it spread? Where else is it? And that's like a really sombering couple of weeks there while you're waiting around for news.
Yeah, and especially because you have two kids, as you mentioned. So, I mean, how is that when you hear the C word and you have kids?
Yeah, because at the time my kids were 4 years old and 2 years old. And so, like, you can't tell them, hey, daddy's got cancer, because they don't know what's going on, right? They just knew daddy was sick. And so we just tried to break that news as gingerly as possible. Daddy's sick. Don't go jumping on his stomach or anything crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine having to do it with kids. And you are 26 now, correct?
27. I just turned 27.
Just turned 27, and you were 25 during
Correct.
treatment. So was this all during COVID?
Yeah, man, and that's even what made it worse. So, yeah, we were right in the big part of COVID. So everything's shut down. Hospitals are on full lockdown, and so when I started chemo, they wouldn't let anybody come back there with me, right? And so you had to do it was 8 hours a day, 5 days straight, and it was by yourself, which was fine. But man, it just made it a lot more isolating for sure. And then I wound up having a stint in the hospital, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And nobody could come in there with me either, so I was in the hospital by myself for a week. So that part of it made it a little more rough. It would have been cool to have somebody there.
Yeah, I mean, that adds a whole new element to it that a lot of people are facing now and have faced recently. And then you also said you live a little bit further away from your family, so that's got to be tough as well.
Yeah, so when the week I was officially diagnosed and had surgery the same week, both of my parents had COVID. And so they were tore up because they couldn't come down for the surgery,
Mm-hmm.
and they couldn't come see me and all that. And so they were super upset about that. But my in-laws, my wife's aunt, and my brother stepped up to the plate, and they both came down. An unlikely duo, my wife's aunt and my brother, managed to come down and help take care of me. So I had the orchiectomy and went back home and was laying on the couch, passed out. And when I woke up, there was a brand new recliner in my living room. And
wow.
yeah, which was great. I guess I bought it and didn't know it, but they had gone and picked up a recliner for me, so I lived in that recliner for like the next 6 weeks. But
That's awesome.
yeah.
With the orchiectomy and recovery, did you have any issues with that?
Yeah. So the surgery went great. The only really weird thing about the surgery is I woke up and my arm was like 3 times the size that it normally was, because
What?
they had missed a vein with the IV,
God.
and it had leaked out like under my skin, so my arm was huge.
Jeez.
But yeah, anyways, that was fine. That was taken care of. But yeah, the surgery went great, but I have definitely had some chronic pain since then. It's not unbearable, but it's like noticeable because I still have to drive a lot. I'm still in that upright position every day when I work. I work at a desk, and so it certainly is agitating at times, just feeling some some discomfort from the surgery still to this day.
And then you were treated with chemo. Were you treated with BEP or EP or something different?
Yeah, it was trying to remember. Yeah, I think it was BEP, right? So bleomycin, etoposide, and whatever the other one that sounds like weed killer is.
Cisplatin.
Yeah, cisplatin.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did that, which was a week straight, and then the bleo was actually spread over 3 Mondays, 3 consecutive Mondays, and that was a huge pain in the butt. And I'm blessed because I didn't have to do chemo as long as a lot of people have to do chemo, thankfully. But even just doing it for a week, I was like, man, I get how people just do not want to do this again. Because I got sick, lost my hair, the whole bit. And then, so I had done my full week. I had done my second bleo treatment on the second Monday. And so I had one more bleo treatment left. And I got an infection in my mouth. And so I'm like fresh out of chemo, right? This is like a day out of a solid week of chemo. And I have this mouth infection. I'm like, okay, whatever. It's just a sore in my mouth. And it gets like outrageously worse over the course of 24 hours. So when you have chemotherapy, like all of your platelet levels and all that stuff are way lower. So you have no white blood cells to fight anything.
Yeah.
So it got super bad in like 24 hours. So I went to the dentist and I was like, yeah, this is what's up. This is what happened. He gave me some high-powered antibiotics. They didn't do squat. And so it was like raging. Like my mouth is swollen. It's raging. And one night I break out in a fever, and I'm like breaking out in cold sweats. And my wife's like, forget this. We're going to the hospital. So again, my family is gone at this point. So my best friend lives about an hour away. And it's in the middle of the night, and she calls him, and she's like, hey, can you please come sit with our kids while I take Mason to the hospital? So he drives through the night, shout out to Matt, and stays with my kids, and we go to the hospital. And, I can't even remember the numbers. I don't remember what a normal platelet count was, but mine was like sub-zero.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, it was super bad. And so they admitted me, obviously. They wouldn't let me go anywhere. And so it got worse. They put me on high-powered antibiotics through my IV. Didn't work. They had to change my antibiotics 3 times, and none of the antibiotics were working. So I'm laying there like 4 days into the hospital. The infection's down in my throat at this point, and like they're worried about my throat closing off. And so I was like, great, I'm going to beat cancer, and I'm going to die from a tooth infection.
Jeez,
This is fantastic. So they bring my oncologist in. They bring an oral surgeon in, and the resident doctor there in, and they're all just like hanging out in my room talking about what they want to do. And so they wound up, the oncologist decides to give me these shots in my stomach that like make your bone marrow create white blood cells. And which isn't like normally a good idea. Like you don't want to always just get those shots unless you have to, but he was like, at this point we got to do it, or you're going to die from a tooth infection, which isn't cool. So they did those, and, it worked, and it knocked that infection out. They wound up having to remove one of my teeth, all in the course of about 7 or 8 days there in the hospital. And that was a weird side effect of the chemotherapy.
Yeah. In your submission, you mentioned that you ignored it for a few days. And I think, that, at least in my case, and probably yours and many others, is with the testicle as well, is ignoring it and allowing it to kind of worsen. So I think the takeaway is to don't ignore stuff.
Absolutely don't ignore it. Like if something is, your body will tell you when something's wrong, right? Like if something's off, just go get it looked at. It's totally fine just to go get something looked at. And so, which is funny because like after I had testicular cancer, I had a couple of friends that were like, hey, I think I have testicular cancer. And I'm like, go get checked. Go get, like, I'm not the doctor. Go to the doctor. If you feel like something's wrong, just go to the doctor, man. And I'll pay your $80 to just go to the doctor. And which they were both fine. I think everybody was just freaked out because I had testicular cancer. But it's definitely better to err on the side of caution and just go get looked at.
Yeah, definitely. And back to chemo, where you lost your hair and everything, and then having the kids. I mean, I think, that's kind of a visible thing that your kids notice, where okay, maybe daddy really, there is something going on with daddy.
Yeah. Yeah, that was tough because you could tell they were really freaked out, and they didn't like it at all. So I started losing my hair in patches. Like, it doesn't just all gracefully fall out at one time. For anybody that hasn't had chemo, and so you look like a dog with the mange there for a little bit. And so I had actually shaved my head before chemo, and it started growing back. Like full head of hair, and I was like, "Oh, great, maybe I'm not gonna lose my hair at all." And then it like fell out in patches again after that.
Yep.
So I think I got too far ahead of it. But they could definitely tell something was up. Obviously, I wore a hat a lot, or a beanie or something. But I had lost. I'm a skinny guy, anyways, right? I'm 6'1", like 155.
Wow.
So I'm a skinny guy. I lost over 20 pounds between the chemo and that stint in the hospital with the infection because I couldn't eat like that whole week. So I looked super bad, right? So I'm super skinny. I have no hair, so they definitely know I'm sick. And there's nothing you can do like to cover it up. You just have to try to put a smile on and be in as good a spirits as you can, and not hide it from them. I didn't want them to feel like I'm trying to hide something from them, because even at 2 and 4. They know something's up, and they know when you're hiding something from them.
Yeah.
So we made them a part of it, and had fun with it, and took pictures with Daddy while he's bald, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, finally when it was over and my hair started growing back, they wanted me to shave it again. So I think they got accustomed to it.
How are they with you in survivorship now? I mean, do they have any comprehension of what happened yet, or how's that?
Yeah, my son, not as much because he was 2. He doesn't really remember much about it. My daughter does. And even when I was getting ready for the podcast, she's like, "What are you talking about? What's going on?" And I was like, "Yeah, you remember when Daddy was sick?" And she's like, "Yeah, and I had to have surgery." And she's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Well, other people have that too, and we're just going to talk about it so they feel better about it." And she's like, "Why'd you have to have surgery in the first place?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, okay, here we go into this whole discussion." So I'm like, "Yeah, here's why." And try to break that down in an elementary level, but she's super curious, and that's fine.
You also mentioned that you said earlier that you had 2 friends that had it, and then somebody introduced you to Dr. Einhorn.
That's right. Yeah, so it was actually somebody I knew from my childhood. It was her husband, and we hadn't kept up with him in years. And then when my diagnosis came out, and they reached out and were a big point of support for us, and we appreciate that. And they actually introduced us to Dr. Einhorn via email, and he was super helpful. I mean, any patient, testicular cancer patient that's had the opportunity to talk to Dr. Einhorn, he's very reassuring, and his confidence, like with his knowledge in this particular diagnosis, it lets you take kind of a deep breath and know what your options are. So, and it's not that my urologist was bad, but Dr. Einhorn is like the guy,
Yeah.
Like when I told my oncologist that I had talked to Dr. Einhorn, he's like, "Oh, like that's the guy. Like that's the guy." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's the guy." And so we got on a phone call with him, and the first thing he said, he goes, "First of all, you're not going to die." And I was like, "Okay, thanks." Because I had sent him my scans and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay, that's great. Everybody take a deep breath." And he walked through what treatments look like. You can observe it. You can, because I was stage 1, and you can do chemo or you can do the RPL&D. And he was like, "There's no wrong choice. Any choice you pick is the right choice." And I was like, can you just pick for me? Can you just decide what I need to do? And he kind of talked about what percentages look like of it reoccurring if you don't do the chemo versus if you do the chemo. And so, after talking about it with my family, we decided to go ahead and do the chemo.
So how did you come to that decision? If he mentioned RPL&D and chemo as options, I mean, what was your thought process picking what you did?
Yeah, and on the other side of it, my thought process may be different because I've read a lot about people who decided to do the RPL&D instead. And anyways, naturally, once you look at what the RPL&D entails, you're like, "Oh, I don't want to do that." Not interested in having my bowels taken out of my body. So that was pretty intimidating. And, being stage 1, he was like, there's a 75% chance you're cancer free right now, But he said, if you're not, instead of 1 round of chemo, you may be looking at 5 if it does come back. And maybe still having to do some surgery. Who knows? It just depends. And, just looking at those percentages, there's 25% chance that it's still in my body. If I do a round of chemo, it goes down to like a 1% chance, and I feel a lot better about those odds.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what was the deciding factor for me.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, Dr. Einhorn kind of is the guy who created the treatment for testicular cancer. And I saw a stat recently that it's estimated that he saved over 300,000 lives. So
yeah, it's absolutely bizarre. And I mean, everybody knows who Lance Armstrong is, right? Dr. Einhorn worked with Lance Armstrong during his treatments too.
Yeah. I mean, it's a small world. It's kind of nuts.
Yeah, it is nuts. I see what you did there. Yeah, but he was so gracious, man, and like so kind. And this guy has to get a gajillion emails and calls a day, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I would think. But he was so cool, and I really appreciate him taking the time to talk to me.
So in survivorship, how has that been for you? Have you kind of put it in the past? Are you still working to kind of raise awareness? Where are you with that?
Absolutely. I'm still raising awareness because I didn't know anything about it. I had never heard, I'd heard of it, but like I never thought I'll get testicular cancer. I didn't know the age ranges. I didn't know it was so prevalent in young men. I didn't know any of that. And so I'm definitely out there just, making testicle jokes all the time, reminding people that I had testicular cancer, making light of it because it's funny to see people's reactions. There's also no better reaction than when somebody sees your Survivor wristband and they're like, "Oh, what kind of cancer did you have?" And you're like, "I had cancer in my balls."
Yeah.
And they're just like, "Oh," and you're like, "No, it's okay. Let's talk about it. Let me tell you why." Yeah. And so it's kind of funny to talk about, but it actually does get it in the front of people's minds, and it has people thinking about it, which is the most important thing. If people are talking about it, then maybe they'll check themselves, and God forbid if they have it, they'll find it early.
Yeah, and I mean that's one thing. No shame in talking about it. There's also people that I know, and I'm sure you know, and have met in treatment and survivorship who don't want to talk about it, and that's fine. But it's good for people like you to talk about it. When you're open about it, it allows them to say, okay, maybe my swollen nut, I can go get that looked at and not feel ashamed about it. I don't have to talk about it, but
right. Yeah, absolutely. And I get it. I mean, it's like embarrassing, right? Nobody wants to just go drop their pants for the doctor. I mean, nobody wants to do that. But the thing you got to keep in mind is first of all, these guys, urologists fondle balls all day, every day, and yours is just another set. They don't care. They don't care about yours any more than anybody else's. So you can get over that. If you can keep it in your mind that it's just another set to them, don't be embarrassed. Just go get checked. It's fine. It's no big deal.
Exactly. Has this cancer changed you in any way?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I think especially that 2-week period where you don't know if it's spread or not, and you're going through every scenario in your mind. I'm super prepared anyways, right? I was 22-year-old. I already had life insurance. I had a cancer policy. I had all this stuff lined up, thankfully. But I'm going through my life insurance documents, making sure everything's in order, checking my will, which was probably a little overboard. But honestly, staring down the possibilities of I don't know if it's spread. I don't know what stage it is. I don't know how bad this is going to be. I didn't even know much about testicular cancer at that point. When you have to confront the possibility of being ill, being very sick, it certainly makes you look at things differently, and almost immediately your priorities change. Wow, how much time have I been spending with my family?
Mm-hmm.
How much time could I have spent here instead of doing this? And that has changed my outlook for the better. And hopefully I will never get over that. But I think through my diagnosis and through the treatments, I've been given the opportunity to work a lot on gratitude and just being grateful for the mundane things in life.
Yeah.
There's some days I'm having a bad day and I'm like, you know what? It's been worse. It could be worse, and that was a gift. So I appreciate that part of it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I think it's probably a common theme as well. What about any kind of lasting side effects of chemo? And I know you said when you're driving, you sometimes feel a little bit of pain still.
Yeah. The chemo is a funny one. I had with that cisplatin, it messes with your hearing. So I had super bad tinnitus for weeks. And I remember going to the doctor and I was like, hey, is this going to stop? And they're like, we hope so. And the tinnitus finally subsided, but I've definitely got a loss of hearing since then, which works to my advantage because now, if my wife tells me to do something and I don't do it, then I'm just like, oh, I didn't hear you. Cancer. You had cancer. And so it's I always win. I always win those arguments. No, but the loss of hearing was definitely a thing. And then, you still get they're still randomly, you just get, some numbness in your fingertips or something like that. That's a little odd from the chemo, and it just hit or miss every now and then.
What about your hair growth? I mean, I noticed with mine after chemo, kind of my facial hair fluctuated the way it grew back, and my hair seems a little bit thinner on the sides. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah. So I was never good at growing a beard anyways, but I was better at it before chemo. It's it's given up altogether now.
Yeah.
But my hair grew back a little bit and then fell out again 3 times. Did you experience that? I don't know if that happened. Yeah, it would come back and then I would get in the shower and I would scrub it right back off. And it was so annoying. I was like, it's never going to stay. And it finally grew back, and I have super straight hair and it's straight now. But when it grew back, dude, it was so curly. It was tight, Shirley Temple curls, and which I was on board with it. I was like, this is great. I love curly hair. After 3 or 4 haircuts, though, it cut all the curls out, so that was short lived.
Yeah.
I was just glad it didn't come back, green or red or something. But
Hey, if it came back green, man, that would have been pretty crazy. What does your follow-up look like now? I mean, are you seeing the doctor every 3, 4 months, 6 months, year?
Yeah, so last month, I've been doing it every 3 months. I've been going every 3 months. And last month was my 1-year visit. So I had the chest x-ray and the CT scan, and everything looked good. So 1 year removed.
Awesome.
And so stoked about that. And so 3 months I go back for blood work, 6 months x-ray, and then 12 months x-ray and CT. And so we're doing that for 3 years. So I'm in year 2 right now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice for anybody who is maybe just now starting down this road?
My advice would be to get involved with the community, and don't isolate yourself, and don't just Google everything, because there's so much different information out there. And the best information you can get is from people that have experienced it and from medical professionals who deal with this all of the time. So, really the community that the Awareness Foundation has built is the best place to start. And I'm so glad that my doctor, my GP was aware of the foundation. They're the ones that actually gave me the information about it. So that's how I got introduced to it. And I'm super glad they did, because this is a place where obviously there's no shaming and you can openly talk about symptoms and what you're going through. And most people have already walked that road, and they'll walk it with you. So I would say, get plug into the community and let them help you.
Yeah, 100%. Do you want to shout out any doctors or hospitals or anywhere? Because you're in a town that I can't even pronounce. Ooltewah?
Close, yeah. If you're out of town, it's Ooltewah. If you live here, the L silent is just
Ooltewah, Tennessee.
Yeah.
So, anybody who is listening who may be in that area, is there anywhere that they should check out?
Yeah. So, the Erlanger health system here is second to none, and all of the nurses and the doctors at Erlanger were super good to me when I was in the hospital. And Tennessee Oncology here also has great nurses. I'll give a special shout out to my GP. His name is Brian Fretwell, and he was so cool, man. Even when it was out of his hands and I was working with the urologist and the oncologist, he was texting me, like the day I was going into surgery, I had a text from him and he was like, "Hey, I'm praying for you this morning. You got this." And he was such a supportive guy, and I really appreciate him. So if you're in the East Tennessee area, go check out Brian Fretwell.
That's awesome. Hey, well, any last thoughts?
No, I don't think so, man. I appreciate you having me on the podcast, and I appreciate what the foundation's doing to build awareness. This is super important. What you're doing with the podcast is awesome, man, and keep it up. I wish you guys the best of luck.
For more information, visit testiscancer.org. You can also follow us on social media at Testis Cancer. We're on Facebook at Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation.